On what seemed like a peaceful morning, a wealthy man, sharply dressed in a designer suit, pushed his 6-year-old son Ethan in a wheelchair along a trail he claimed was part of a special outing he had promised. As they neared a steep cliff, the boy who had always feared heights started to tremble. His small hands, pale and shaky, clutched the arms of the chair as he asked, "Dad, why are we here?" His father said nothing. His heart pounded inside his chest as the reality of his actions hit him. And yet, without hesitation, he gave the wheelchair a sudden, powerful shove toward the edge. Then, turning his back, he walked swiftly toward his luxury car parked nearby, while the fading scream of his child echoed behind him, swallowed by the canyon. What he didn't realize, though, was that a great white horse had witnessed it all, and what would happen just seconds later would leave everyone stunned. But before we begin, one important request. Subscribe to the channel. That one click helps stories like this reach those who still need to be heard. And yes, your click truly makes a difference. Now let's rewind a little. Just moments earlier, the sun had barely risen above the horizon when Ethan felt the crisp morning breeze brushing against his face. His fingers tightened around the cold metal armrests as he looked up at the pink-tinged clouds stretching across the sky. At only 6 years old, he already understood what it meant to be different. His wide, expressive hazel eyes gazed into the distance filled with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. His father, Richard Hartwell, walked beside him in silence, pushing the wheelchair down a trail unfamiliar to the boy. "Where are we going, Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice so soft that the morning wind nearly carried it away. Richard didn't answer right away. His polished Italian shoes crunched steadily over the packed dirt as he kept his posture stiff and composed, his pristine suit standing in stark contrast to the wild, untamed land around them. His eyes showed no warmth. Not far from them, Snow, the family's majestic white horse, lifted his head from the grass, sensing something unusual. The animal, who had always shared a quiet connection with Ethan, watched closely as father and son approached the edge of the ravine. His hooves shifted nervously against the earth, as though he could sense that something was terribly wrong on this seemingly calm morning. "It's a special walk," Richard finally replied, his tone flat and distant. "I thought you'd enjoy seeing the sunrise from way up here." Ethan tried to return a smile, but there was something about his father's voice that sent a chill down his spine. Since Richard had announced his marriage to Vanessa 3 months earlier, everything on the Hartwell ranch had changed. The wind picked up, blowing through Ethan's brown hair. He pulled his pink hoodie tighter around him, shivering not from the cold, but from something deeper. Vanessa had never tried to hide her distaste for the boy broken, as she once called him. She would mutter cruel things when she thought no one was listening. "He's a burden on this family." From the field, Snow neighed sharply, a high-pitched, uneasy sound that made Ethan turn his head. That horse had always been his only true friend on the property since his mother had left 2 years ago. "Snow sounds nervous, Dad," he said, voice trembling slightly. "Maybe we should go back." Richard stopped pushing the chair, now dangerously close to the edge. The ravine opened wide before them, deep and menacing. Ethan felt his chest tighten with fear as he realized the wheels were just inches from the cliff's drop. "Dad," he said again, this time with unmistakable panic in his voice. "You know, Ethan," Richard began, his voice colder than the wind, "sometimes life forces us to make hard decisions, ones others won't understand." He let go of the wheelchair handles and stepped back. "Vanessa's right. You're a weight I can't carry anymore." Snow started galloping toward them, his hooves pounding the earth like thunder. The horse clearly sensed the danger, but was too far away to intervene. Tears ran down Ethan's cheeks as he realized what was about to happen. "Please, Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "I promise I'll be better." At that very moment, the sun finally crested over the distant hills, casting a golden glow across the canyon. It was then that Richard made his final move. In a swift, decisive motion, he shoved the wheelchair forward without hesitation. The world seemed to twist beneath Ethan as the chair tipped over the edge. His scream fused with the desperate whinny of Snow the white horse. Time seemed to slow as the fall dragged on, the wheelchair spinning through the air, Ethan still strapped in tightly by his safety harness. By some strange twist of fate, the chair caught on a jagged ledge just a few meters below, wedged between knotted branches and protruding rocks. The impact was jarring, but the boy remained conscious, his body trembling as silent tears slid down his cheeks. Up above, Richard leaned over the edge for a moment to make sure no one else had seen what had just happened. The only witness was the family's horse, now pacing along the cliff's edge, neighing wildly. Showing not the faintest sign of guilt, Richard calmly adjusted his tie, turned away from the ledge, and began walking back toward the ranch house, already forming in his mind the version of events he would later recount, one that would explain the sudden disappearance of his son. Below, trapped in a fragile perch between sky and abyss, Ethan stared upward through tear-blurred eyes. The bright blue sky overhead felt cruel in its indifference, while the heavy sound of Snow's hooves echoed above as if the animal refused to abandon him. There, suspended between hope and despair, Ethan's fight to survive had only just begun. Tom Rivera had worked as the head ranch hand on the Hartwell estate for more than 20 years. That morning, as he made his way through the barn feeding the animals, he noticed something strange in Snow's behavior. The normally calm and obedient white stallion was unusually restless. His dark eyes were filled with a kind of urgency that set off an alarm in Tom's chest, and his repeated sharp neighs made the seasoned foreman stop in his tracks. "Easy there, boy," Tom muttered as he approached with a bundle of hay in his arms. "What's got into you today?" He knew every animal on the ranch, but Snow had always been different. Tom still remembered the day the horse arrived with little Ethan and how instantly bonded they became. That memory now gave him pause. It struck him as odd he hadn't seen Ethan that morning. Normally, the boy was up before breakfast, wheeling himself out to the stables to talk to Snow in their own quiet language. His absence stirred something uneasy in Tom's gut. Snow nudged the hay away with his nose, refusing to eat. His ears were pointed, his eyes fixed toward the direction of the canyon, every muscle tense. Tom followed the horse's gaze and caught sight of Mr. Hartwell walking back down the path toward the house. There was something off about the man's stride, stiffer than usual, more mechanical. "Morning, sir," Tom called out, raising a hand in greeting. Richard gave a brief, almost dismissive nod, never breaking stride, and not once making eye contact. His expensive clothes were faintly dusted with dirt, a detail that didn't escape Tom's sharp eye. Snow neighed again, louder this time, stomping his hooves into the barn floor. The horse suddenly tried to bolt out of his stall, and Tom had to grip the reins tightly to hold him back. Whoa, calm down, buddy, calm. What's gotten into you today?" It was then that something near Snow's hooves caught Tom's attention, a small pink satin ribbon, the kind Ethan always tied to the armrest of his wheelchair. Tom's heart started to pound. Something was definitely wrong. In over 2 decades working that land, he had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, every fiber of his being told him something terrible had happened. "Rosa," he called out to his wife, who had just stepped out of the small workers' cottage nearby. "Have you seen Ethan this morning?" Rosa frowned, adjusting her apron. "Not yet," she replied, worry clouding her expression, "but I always see him from the kitchen window whenever he goes to see Snow." Their eyes locked for a moment, a silent understanding passing between them. Did something happen? Tom turned the ribbon over in his weathered fingers, his mind racing. "I don't know yet," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "but I'm going to find out." He knew Richard Hartwell well enough to understand one thing: the man was not the type to take early morning walks, especially not in the direction of the canyon. Inside the Grand Ranch house, raised voices began to ripple through the halls. Vanessa, Richard's new wife, paced anxiously while speaking to one of the housemaids. "What do you mean you can't find Ethan? He has to be around here somewhere." But the tone in her voice held no genuine concern, only annoyance. Just then Richard appeared in the doorway, still tightening his tie. "Don't worry," he said coolly, his voice steady and rehearsed. "Ethan was taken this morning to a special treatment center in another city. I personally escorted him to the transport." From a distance, Tom watched the exchange, and a chill crept up his spine. In all his years working at the ranch, he had never once heard of any treatment plan. Why would the boss keep something like that secret? Up near the barn, Snow remained restless, tugging hard at the reins in the direction of the canyon. The horse seemed frantic, his wide eyes locked on the horizon as if burdened with a secret too heavy to hold. Tom looked again at the pink satin ribbon still crumpled in his hand, then toward the narrow path leading to the cliff. A decision began to solidify in his mind. "Rosa," he called quietly, "pack a bag with water and some food. Don't tell anyone." His wife gave a quick nod, recognizing that particular edge in his voice. It was the same tone he used only when something serious was happening. By the time the sun was high overhead, Tom had released Snow's reins. The horse instantly began walking toward the canyon, pausing every few steps to glance back, as if checking that the foreman was still behind him. Tom shoved the ribbon into his pocket and followed, heart pounding with dread he prayed was unfounded. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, Ethan realized he would have to survive the night. Still trapped on the rocky ledge, his small hands were scraped raw from clinging to the branches. Fear crept in with the lengthening shadows. The wheelchair, still miraculously wedged between twisted branches and stone, creaked and groaned with every gust of wind. "Mom always said stories make us strong," he whispered to himself, remembering how she used to sit by his hospital bed, spinning fairy tales to help him sleep through endless nights of treatment. That was how he got through the worst days, by pretending he was a knight or a hero fighting to survive. Above him, Snow stood watch, refusing to leave. The white horse neighed from the cliff's edge every so often, as if to say, "I'm still here. I won't leave you." The sound was the only comfort Ethan had in the absolute silence of that cold descent. "Do you remember when we first met, Snow?" he called out, his voice shaky from cold and fear. "I'd just gotten back from the hospital, and you were the only one who didn't look at me funny because of the chair." A single tear slipped down his cheek as the memory surfaced. Snow, approaching in the ranch yard, lowering his head to press his nose gently into Ethan's small hand. The wind picked up sharper now, tugging at his hoodie. He pulled it tighter around him and silently thanked whoever had dressed him warmly that morning. His thoughts wandered to the ranch house where Vanessa was probably already celebrating his absence. "Now she gets to be the only one in that house," he muttered, bitterly surprised by how clearly he understood what was happening. As darkness settled in, shadows began to dance along the canyon walls. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, recalling one of his mother's favorite bedtime stories, the one about the princess trapped in a high tower who never gave up hope. "I won't give up either," he whispered to himself, even as a sob escaped his lips. Snow whinnied again, louder this time, with urgent insistence. Ethan opened his eyes just in time to see a faint light moving along the edge of the canyon above. His heart raced. Could it be someone searching for him? But the light disappeared just as quickly as it had come, plunging him back into silence alone with his shattered hope. "At least I've got you. Snow!" he called up, drawing strength from the steady sound of hooves above. Strange how he couldn't even see the horse anymore. Yet the creature's presence kept him from feeling completely alone. Night crept on, bringing with it unfamiliar sounds that echoed up and down the ravine. Every new noise made Ethan flinch, imagining creatures lurking just beyond the shadows. To distract himself, he began to softly hum a lullaby his mother used to sing, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." One by one, stars began to scatter across the velvet sky like silver specks. Ethan looked up, scanning for the constellations his mother had taught him to spot. "Look, Snow," he whispered, "that one's the Big Dipper. Mom said it protects lost travelers." The chill was intensifying now, his teeth chattering from the cold. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and his throat had grown dry and scratchy from thirst. But what hurt the most was the crushing weight of betrayal, the heartbreaking certainty that his own father had left him there on purpose. "Why, Dad?" Ethan whispered into the night, his voice small and cracked. "I tried so hard to be the son you wanted." The tears returned, but this time he didn't hold them back. They streamed down freely, mingling with the damp mist that had begun to gather in the canyon air. Snow responded with a soft whinny, as if trying to offer comfort. The familiar sound drew a faint smile through Ethan's tears. "You're my guardian angel, you know that," he murmured to the horse. "A white angel with 4 legs." The moon slipped out from behind the clouds and spilled silver light over the canyon. For a moment, Ethan could make out Snow's proud silhouette etched against the starry sky, his white coat glowing like it carried light within. "I'm going to tell you a story for both of us," Ethan said, steadying his voice. "Once upon a time there was a boy and his magical horse." And so, through tears and laughter, fear and imagination, Ethan endured his first night trapped in the ravine, clinging to hope as fiercely as he clung to the branches that held his battered wheelchair in place. Meanwhile, Tom traced the faint impressions left by the wheelchair along the dusty trail that led toward the cliff. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the hard-packed earth. Snow walked ahead of him, stopping occasionally to look back, as if checking to be sure the foreman was still following. His dark eyes held a silent urgency Tom had never seen in the animal before. Back at the Hartwell estate, tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Rosa, Tom's wife, moved through the kitchen quietly, keeping one eye on the chaos unfolding beyond the swinging door. Vanessa, the new lady of the house, paced the halls with a frenzied energy, barking out conflicting orders to staff while rearranging furniture and inspecting every corner with obsessive precision. "I want everything from Ethan's room removed," she snapped to one of the maids, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Now that he's off at treatment, we'll turn the space into something actually useful." Her designer heels clacked against the polished floors as she supervised a satisfied little smirk playing on her painted lips. Behind a locked door in his office, Richard Hartwell remained shut away. Curtains drawn, the occasional sound of drawers slamming and papers rustling slipping into the hallway. As Rosa passed with a tray of tea, she caught the unmistakable scent of something burning wafting from beneath the door. Down by the canyon, Tom found the spot where the wheelchair tracks abruptly ended near the cliff's edge. His breath caught when he noticed the deep grooves in the dirt, the sign of a sudden, violent movement. Snow let out a low whinny and stepped toward the edge, staring downward as if willing Tom to see what he had seen. "Dear God," Tom breathed, kneeling beside the disturbed soil. Years of working the land had sharpened his instincts, and every one of them screamed that something awful had taken place here. Cautiously, he edged closer to the precipice, scanning the jagged rocks below for any sign of life. That's when he heard it, a faint, nearly inaudible whimper echoing between the stones. Snow's ears twitched, and he neighed in response. Tom's entire body went rigid with realization. "Ethan," he shouted, voice cracking with emotion. "Ethan, can you hear me?" The silence that followed was suffocating until a fragile voice floated back up Uncle Tom. Back at the estate, Rosa was gathering linens when something caught her eye in the garden trash bin, a half-burned piece of paper. She bent down and retrieved it, trying to make out the charred words. Before she could study it further, Vanessa appeared from nowhere and snatched it out of her hands. "It's garbage," she said coldly. "Stick to your chores, Rosa." Rosa lowered her eyes, nodding submissively, but her sharp gaze had already noticed something important: medical forms. And one corner not yet consumed by flame clearly showed Ethan's name. In Richard's office, the destruction continued. On his desk sat a stack of papers waiting to be shredded: medical evaluations, physical therapy reports, even the will of his late first wife, which promised a substantial inheritance to Ethan upon turning 18. "We can't afford to have an heir like that," Vanessa had hissed the night before, her words dripping with venom. "Think about our future, Richard. Everything we could build without that burden holding us down." At the canyon, Tom leaned out as far as he dared, desperately trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. His heart nearly stopped when he finally saw him, the wheelchair wedged miraculously between a cluster of rocks and gnarled branches, and in it, Ethan curled up and trembling. "Hold on, kiddo!" Tom cried out, tears streaking down his weathered cheeks. "I'm going to get help. Snow will stay with you." As if he understood every word, the white horse planted himself firmly at the edge of the ravine, eyes locked on the small figure below. Tom rose shakily to his feet, fury and heartbreak churning in his chest alongside a deep, aching sense of duty. He knew he had to tread carefully. Richard Hartwell was a man of power and influence with connections that reached across the entire region. A reckless accusation could destroy more than it saved. "Stay strong, my boy," he whispered, casting one last look into the canyon before turning to run for help. "I'll get you out of there, even if it's the last thing I do." The sky was painted in rich tones of orange and crimson as Tom arrived breathless and dust-covered at the cabin of his longtime friend Mike, an expert climber who lived on the neighboring property. His hands trembled as he pounded on the door, adrenaline pounding through his veins. "Mike, please open up. It's urgent," he shouted, voice hoarse with emotion. Mike appeared moments later, alarmed by the desperation in his friend's voice. "Tom, what is it? What happened?" he asked immediately, sensing from Tom's shaking frame and wild eyes that something serious had gone terribly wrong. Meanwhile, back at the Hartwell estate, Rosa was quietly packing a small bag of supplies. Years spent working in the kitchen had taught her how to move unnoticed and efficiently. She carefully chose items that wouldn't be missed: granola bars, bottled water, a compact first aid kit. Upstairs, Vanessa was gliding through the hallway like a queen surveying her palace, already imagining the changes she'd make. She paused in front of Ethan's room, a smug little smile curling on her lips as she envisioned a complete makeover. "Finally, I'll have my painting studio," she muttered to herself, already picturing fresh paint easels and sunlight pouring through the windows. Down in the ravine, Ethan was fighting hard to stay awake. The long hours under the sun had left his skin tender, and thirst had become unbearable. Snow still stood vigil above, occasionally letting out soft, mournful whinnies, as if reminding the boy that he wasn't alone. "Uncle Tom is coming back," Ethan repeated over and over in his mind like a prayer, clinging to the foreman's promise like a lifeline. His small, scraped hands clutched tightly at the metal arms of his chair. The evening air was cooling quickly, and the steel beneath him began to creak as the wind picked up. Back at Mike's cabin, Tom poured out the story in rushed, breathless fragments. Mike listened with grim focus, his experienced mind quickly assembling a mental blueprint of what needed to be done. "We're gonna need proper gear," Mike said, already walking toward his storage shed. "Harnesses, carabiners, rope, and most of all, stealth. If Richard finds out what we're doing..." "He won't," Tom interrupted, helping sort through supplies. "He can't. I know that ravine like the back of my hand," Mike said, his voice steady but urgent. "I've climbed it more times than I can count, but we need to move fast. The weather's turning." Dark clouds were beginning to roll across the sky, signaling an oncoming storm. Tom looked up anxiously, his rough hands curling around the pink ribbon he still carried in his pocket, Ethan's. Back at the estate, Rosa watched Richard from the kitchen window. He was pacing the garden with his phone pressed tightly to his ear, speaking in low, hurried tones. Fragments of his words floated through the glass. "The papers. Transfer. No one can find out." At the top of the ravine, Snow sensed the shift in the air before the first drop of rain fell. The wind picked up, rustling his mane, and he let out a sharp warning neigh. "It's okay, Snow," Ethan called weakly, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Mom always said, after the storm comes the calm." His voice cracked on the last word, and a single tear slipped down his dirt-streaked face. Mike and Tom were already hiking the narrow path to the ravine, backpacks loaded, each of them caught in their own thoughts. Mike was running rescue scenarios in his head while Tom whispered silent prayers with every step. "We're gonna need light," Mike muttered, squinting at the darkening sky. "And we'll need to move fast. Those clouds don't look friendly." A low rumble of thunder echoed through the valley, and Ethan shrank further into his chair, hugging himself tightly. Snow responded with a nervous neigh, his hooves stamping anxiously on the rocky ledge. The first raindrop landed cold and heavy on Ethan's cheek like a tear from the sky. "Please, Uncle Tom," he whispered, his voice nearly swallowed by the growing wind. "Please, hurry back." The rain began to fall harder as Mike and Tom reached the edge of the canyon. Snow greeted them with an urgent neigh, his bright eyes glowing in the rising darkness. The horse stood close to the spot where Ethan was trapped, as if guarding it with his life. Tom shouted into the wind, his voice straining to break through the storm. "We're here, buddy. I brought help." His heart clenched when he heard the faint, broken voice rise from below, barely audible above the howl of the wind. Mike was already working fast, his hands practiced and steady as he laid out ropes and buckled gear. Every motion was measured precise, even as the storm loomed above them, threatening to drown the night in chaos. "I'm going down first," Mike said as he adjusted his harness. "I need to assess how stable the chair is and how it's wedged into the rock." Back at the Hartwell estate, Rosa stood at the kitchen window clutching the rosary buried in her apron pocket, her knuckles white with tension. The thunder rattled the old house, and the lights flickered with every crack in the sky. Vanessa moved through the hallways like a restless ghost, pausing now and then to stare out the rain-streaked windows. Her flawless face was lined with a tension that didn't match her usual mask of composure. "Richard," she called as she entered his study. "What if someone finds out?" Richard looked up from the papers he was still sorting, his expression ice cold. "No one's going to find out," he replied sharply. "In a few days, everyone will accept that Ethan was taken to a special treatment facility. And in a few weeks, when we announce that he—" His voice faltered briefly, but then hardened again that he didn't survive the complications. Down in the ravine, Mike began his descent, the beam from his helmet flashlight cutting through the darkness. The rain had turned the rocks slick and treacherous, and the wind made the rope sway dangerously. Tom held the other end of the line tightly, his gloved hands bracing against the pull. "I see him!" Mike shouted after descending several feet. "Ethan, buddy, don't move!" "I'm almost there." The boy lifted his rain-soaked face, his eyes wide with fear and hope. His wheelchair was balanced precariously between two rocky ledges held in place by a few thick branches growing from cracks in the stone. It was a miracle the chair had held this long. Uncle Mike Ethan's voice quivered. "I'm scared. The chair keeps making weird noises." As if to echo his words, a loud metallic creak rang out from beneath him. Mike finally reached the ledge where Ethan was trapped. Moving with precision, he inched closer to the chair, analyzing the situation. "You're gonna be okay, kiddo," he said, keeping his tone steady, despite the rising urgency in his chest. "I'm getting you out of here." Up at the rim, Snow stood stone-still, ears pricked, soaked through but unmoving. The horse's entire body trembled beneath his drenched coat, as if he could feel the tension below. Every so often he let out a soft whinny, a sound that seemed to carry reassurance down the canyon walls. "Tom," Mike called up. "Get the second harness ready. I'll need to detach him from the chair and bring him up separately." Tom immediately got to work, hands shaking, not just from the cold, but from the weight of what they were doing. The rain now fell in sheets, blurring the world around them. Flashes of lightning lit the ravine like a strobe, revealing how fragile everything was. Mike moved methodically, ignoring the water dripping down his face. "Ethan, listen to me," he said, locking eyes with the boy. "I need to unclip you from the chair. It'll be scary for a second, but I swear I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Do you trust me?" Ethan swallowed hard, clutching the chair's arms tighter. "I do," he whispered. "But what about Snow? Will he be okay up there?" Mike's chest tightened at the boy's concern for the horse, even in such a terrifying moment. "Snow's strong," he said, prepping the harness around Ethan's waist. "He's watching over you right now like a guardian angel." A deafening clap of thunder rolled across the canyon, and the wheelchair groaned in protest, metal straining under the pressure. There was no more time. The rescue had to happen now before the storm grew worse. Mike took a deep breath, steeling himself for the most delicate part of the mission. With rainwater running down his arms and into his gloves, he began to unfasten the buckles that held Ethan to the chair. Every movement had to be exact. One misstep could cost everything. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, silently repeating the prayer his mother had taught him. Almost there, Kid Mike murmured, forcing his voice to stay even through the wind's roar. The harness was now fully secured around Ethan's body, clipped to the second rope Tom was gripping tightly above. This was the moment. At that very same time, back at the Hartwell estate, something unexpected was unfolding. Rosa, still busy with her kitchen chores, heard raised voices echoing from the study. The storm outside muffled parts of the conversation, but a few key words pierced through the partially open door. "What do you mean? The will can't be invalidated." Vanessa's voice was shrill with panic. "You promised you'd find a way, Richard. You said we'd fix this." "The lawyers say they need a death certificate," Richard replied, tension thick in his voice. "Without that, the inheritance remains under her name. And now that damn ranch hand is acting suspicious, asking questions." Rosa felt her pulse spike. Without making a sound, she stepped closer to the door, heart pounding with the weight of what she was hearing. In the background, the old kitchen radio was broadcasting a weather alert. This storm would be the worst in years. Down in the canyon, Mike finally released the last buckle from the wheelchair. "Okay, Ethan," he said firmly. "I'm going to lift you into my arms now." "This will be quick, I promise," Mike said, already positioning his hands to make the transfer. And then everything shifted. A blinding flash split the sky, immediately followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The impact shook the canyon wall, sending tremors through the rocks. The wheelchair, already unstable, began to slide. Now, Mike shouted, grabbing Ethan in one swift motion just as the chair tumbled into the abyss below. Ethan's scream mingled with the sharp metallic shriek of the chair crashing against jagged stone as it vanished into the darkness. Above, Snow let out a terrified neigh that echoed like a battle cry across the ravine, louder even than the rolling thunder. Tom clung to the rope with every ounce of strength in his body, his boots digging into the muddy ground for stability. Back at the Hartwell estate, Rosa could no longer hold back. With tears streaking her cheeks, she picked up the kitchen phone and dialed a number she had memorized long ago. "Sheriff's office," came the voice on the line. Rosa's voice trembled as she spoke. "I need to report something terrible." Mike began his ascent. Ethan secured in his arms, both of them strapped together in a double harness system that would keep the child safe even if Mike slipped. The rain fell like needles stinging their skin, but none of that mattered anymore. "Don't look down," Mike said gently. "Look up at Snow. See how he's keeping watch over us." Ethan nodded weakly, his eyes fixed on the white silhouette of the horse, standing tall against the storm-lit sky. Inside the estate, Richard was pouring himself another glass of scotch when the power suddenly went out. The entire house was plunged into darkness, and in that silence came the rising sound of sirens growing louder as they neared the property. "What is that?" Vanessa asked, her pale face catching the flash of lightning. Richard didn't answer. His hands trembled so badly the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Down in the canyon, Mike and Ethan reached the top. Tom rushed in with a blanket Rosa had packed, wrapping it around the soaked, trembling boy. Snow stepped closer, gently nudging Ethan's cheek with his muzzle. "You did it, little man," Tom whispered, his voice breaking as rain mingled with tears on his face. "You were so brave." But his words were interrupted by the unmistakable sound slicing through the night, police sirens closing in. The storm began to ease, as though nature itself had played its part. The clouds slowly drifted apart, revealing a moon that bathed the scene in silver light. Still shaking, Ethan looked up from Tom's arms, his eyes moving from Snow to the men who had saved him. "Will everything be okay now?" he asked, his voice small but full of hope. Mike and Tom exchanged a long, meaningful glance. They knew the hardest part hadn't even started yet. The sirens drew closer, their red and blue lights flickering across the muddy ground like a surreal kaleidoscope. Ethan, still wrapped in the blanket, remained in Tom's arms as Snow stood beside them like a sentinel. The horse's soaked coat shimmered under the moonlight, making him look almost otherworldly. "Sheriff Brooks," Tom called as a tall man with a serious face approached. "Thank you for coming so fast." The sheriff took one look at the scene, the drenched boy, the climbing gear, the pale faces of the men, and nodded grimly. "The report we received was serious," he said, his voice firm. "Rosa told us everything she overheard. We're taking this boy to the hospital first. Then," his gaze hardened, "then we're going to have a very long conversation with Mr. Hartwell." Back inside the estate, chaos had erupted. Richard was tearing through his office in a panic, shoving papers into drawers, knocking over lamps, desperately trying to destroy anything that might be used against him. Vanessa sat collapsed on a leather sofa, her makeup running her hands, shaking. "How did he survive?" Richard muttered over and over, fingers pulling at his hair. "That fall, in that chair. It's not possible." The sirens were now just outside, their wails splitting the night. Richard's face went ghostly white. From the kitchen doorway, Rosa watched it all unfold, her heart pounding, but her conscience finally quiet. Years of loyalty to the Hartwell family couldn't stand against what was right. Her hands still trembled as she clutched her rosary, but in her eyes burned a quiet, unwavering resolve. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said softly as paramedics checked his vitals in the back of the ambulance. His wide, tear-rimmed eyes searched for Tom's. "Snow. He tried to warn me. When Dad took me to the cliff, Snow started acting different. He knew." Tom took Ethan's hand gently, his own heart aching. "Of course he knew, kiddo. Snow has always been your guardian angel." The horse, as if understanding, stepped up to the open ambulance, pressing his nose gently to Ethan's shoulder. Outside, Sheriff Brooks gave the signal to approach the house. Patrol cars formed a quiet perimeter around the estate, their lights slicing through the darkness like sharp blades of color. Officers moved into position following commands relayed in low whispers. "Richard Hartwell." Sheriff Brooks's voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is the Sheriff's Department. Come out with your hands where we can see them." The silence that followed was crushing, broken only by the distant crash of shattering glass somewhere inside the house. Mike, still wearing his climbing gear, stood with the investigators recounting every moment of the rescue. The chair was wedged between the rocks, he explained, his voice still shaky from the adrenaline. "It's honestly a miracle it didn't fall sooner. If it hadn't been for Snow." The white horse stood silently beside the ambulance, refusing to move more than a few feet from Ethan. His sharp, intelligent eyes tracked the paramedics' every move, as if judging whether they were treating his boy with enough care. "He doesn't have to stay here alone, does he?" Ethan asked anxiously when the medics mentioned taking him to the hospital. "Snow has to come with me." His small fingers clutched the blanket tight, fear of being separated evident in his voice. "Don't worry," Tom said gently, brushing the boy's damp hair from his forehead. "I'll take care of him. And once you're feeling better, you'll see him every single day." A soft sob slipped from Ethan's lips, but this time it was a cry of relief. Back inside the estate, the sound of doors being forced open echoed through the night. Officers swept through the elegant rooms with flashlights cutting across polished surfaces and silk curtains. Richard was found in his study, slumped in a leather chair, an empty glass dangling from his fingers, half-burned documents scattered at his feet. "It's over," he said flatly as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Vanessa, discovered in the master bedroom, didn't resist. Her world of silk robes and deceit was unraveling faster than she could process. Outside, the moon now shone with full force, as if it too had waited to reveal the truth. Snow let out a low whinny, part victory, part promise, that this was not the end, but a beginning. The small-town hospital had never seen anything like this. In the pediatric wing, Ethan rested in a private room, its window overlooking a garden where, unbelievably, a white horse stood vigil. Snow had followed the ambulance all the way from the ranch, and no one, not even the hospital security, had dared to chase him off. "He's something else," remarked Dr. Elaine as she adjusted Ethan's IV. She was an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, and she had quickly been enchanted by the story of the boy and his equine protector. 30 years in pediatrics, and I've never seen anything like it. Now, clean wrapped in fresh clothes and tucked into soft pillows, Ethan lay quietly, his gaze constantly drifting to the window where Snow's silhouette stood against the moonlight. Every so often, the horse would lift his head and let out a soft whinny as if to say, "I'm still here." In the hallway, Tom and Rosa spoke quietly with Sheriff Brooks. The ranch couple had become key witnesses in the case, especially after Rosa had come forward with everything she'd overheard in the house. "The documents we recovered are more than enough," said the sheriff, flipping through a folder. "Hartwell tried to burn them, but we salvaged plenty. His late wife's will, falsified medical records, even a step-by-step plan to forge psychiatric commitment papers." Rosa squeezed Tom's arm, remembering the nights she'd listened to Richard and Vanessa whispering behind closed doors. "They planned it all in the study," she murmured, her voice shaking with fury. "They wanted to make it look like Ethan had been sent away for treatment. And then..." She couldn't finish. In the hospital room, Ethan received a very special visitor. Mike, still dressed in his climbing gear, had brought something that made the boy's eyes light up: a small camera. "I thought you might want to capture the view from your window," he said, helping Ethan adjust the settings. Snow's become such a sensation, people are starting to call him the hospital guardian. In fact, a small crowd gathered every day to see the white horse who never strayed far from the window. Children brought carrots and apples, which Snow accepted politely, though he never moved too far from his post. He always knew. "Didn't he?" Ethan asked softly, adjusting the camera's focus. "Since that morning, when he tried to stop it." "Dad." His voice no longer trembled when he spoke. The word just carried a quiet, heavy sadness that seemed far older than 6 years. Mike sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "Some animals have a gift," he said. "They see what we miss. Snow isn't just a horse. He's your guardian angel on 4 legs." At the sheriff's station, Richard and Vanessa sat through their first round of questioning. The once glamorous couple could hardly look at each other now. The polished veneer of sophistication had shattered, revealing the cold, raw truth behind their carefully crafted lives. "How could you?" Sheriff Brooks asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "He's just a child." Richard said nothing, but Vanessa broke down her words, tumbling out in broken pieces, as though a dam had finally burst. "It was the trust," she sobbed. "All the money was locked in a fund for Ethan. Richard couldn't touch a cent until he turned 18. And me, I didn't want a disabled stepson." Back at the hospital, Dr. Elaine reviewed Ethan's latest lab work. "You're one tough little warrior," she said with a warm smile. 2 days in that canyon and not a single serious complication. "I'd say someone up there was watching over you. And someone down here too," Ethan replied, his gaze drifting to the window where Snow now rested beneath a shady oak tree. The horse lifted his head as if sensing the boy's eyes, letting out a soft, reassuring whinny. Tom and Rosa, now officially named temporary guardians, were finalizing arrangements to bring Ethan home once he was cleared to leave. They had transformed the bedroom that once belonged to their grown married daughter into a cozy sanctuary for their new family member. "What about Snow?" Ethan asked, for what must have been the 100th time, worry etched in every word. Tom chuckled gently, running his fingers through the boy's hair. "He's coming with us." "Of course," he promised. "I've already started building a special stable right outside your window. He'll be able to see you from there, just like he does here at the hospital." A genuine smile broke across Ethan's face, the first one since that morning on the cliff. Outside, Snow answered with a cheerful neigh, as if he too understood that something beautiful was about to begin. The day of Ethan's discharge came with the feel of a new beginning. The modest Lopez home, once quiet and simple, now buzzed with life and anticipation. Rosa had spent the entire week preparing Ethan's room, filling it with bright colors and thoughtful little touches that made the space feel like magic. "Look what I found in the attic," she said, hanging an old dream catcher near the window. The delicate threads and white feathers danced lightly in the breeze. "It belonged to my daughter. They say it keeps nightmares away and only lets the good dreams in." Tom, meanwhile, had completely renovated the old barn into a custom-built stable for Snow. With help from Mike and a few neighbors, they constructed a space that allowed the horse to look directly into Ethan's room. Every beam, every nail told a story of love and intention. "It's like we're building a bridge," Mike said while installing soft lighting, a bridge between a special boy and his four-legged guardian angel. At the hospital, Ethan was getting ready for the trip home. Dr. Elaine conducted the final checks, but her eyes weren't on the monitors. They were on the glow of hope lighting up the boy's face. "You know, Ethan," she said, putting away her stethoscope. "In all my years of medicine, I've learned there's more than one kind of healing. Sometimes love is the strongest medicine of all." She paused, glancing out the window at Snow, who stood at his post without fail. "And I'd say you've got an extra special dose of that waiting for you outside." News of Ethan's story had spread across the small town, touching hearts and stirring something in the community. When the hospital's accessible transport van pulled up in front of the Lopez home, a small crowd had already gathered waiting to welcome Ethan home. "Welcome to your new life, sweetheart," Rosa whispered as they stepped outside. "This is your beginning." Snow, who had followed the van every step of the way, trotted excitedly around it. Now his hooves kicking up little clouds of dust as he whinnied with joy. "Look at him." Rosa smiled at Tom. "It's like he's throwing his own welcome home party." Tom could only nod, too overcome to speak. The new wheelchair donated by a local charity was customized with sleek white accents that perfectly matched Snow's coat. Ethan noticed instantly, running his small fingers along the smooth armrests. "It's like it was made just for the two of us," he said as Tom helped him down from the van. Snow stepped forward immediately, touching his nose to Ethan's cheek in a gesture so tender the crowd couldn't hold back their gasps. Inside, more surprises awaited. The bedroom had been fitted with ramps and handrails to give Ethan more freedom. A low bookshelf displayed storybooks, and on the bed sat a brand new photo album waiting to be filled with memories. "This is just the beginning," Rosa said as she gave him a tour of the room. "We're going to build a beautiful life here, you'll see." Her eyes shimmered with tears of quiet joy. From the bedroom window, Ethan could see the new stable clearly. Snow was already exploring, but he kept returning to the same corner where he could see Ethan through the glass. It was as if an invisible thread bound them together, stronger than any hardship they had faced. "Did you know horses can feel what we feel?" Mike said as he sat beside Ethan, both of them watching Snow graze peacefully nearby. "They're like mirrors to our emotions. And that one right there," he added, pointing to the white horse, "has a heart just as big as yours." The afternoon drifted on, and the small backyard celebration had blossomed into a full-blown neighborhood gathering. Families brought pies, homemade cookies, and classic American cookout dishes, turning Ethan's welcome home into a heartfelt community event. Sheriff Brooks even made an appearance, not just in his official capacity, but bearing a special gift, signed documents granting temporary custody of Ethan to Tom and Rosa. "It's just the start of the legal process," he explained. "But as far as we're concerned, you're his guardians now." The warmth in the sheriff's smile left no doubt that he wholeheartedly supported the arrangement. The weeks that followed turned like pages in a peaceful storybook. At the Lopez home, each new day brought a fresh discovery, a moment of laughter, or a quiet victory on Ethan's journey to healing. Mornings always began with Snow's gentle whinny, his way of saying good morning, and Ethan would respond from his window with a bright, "Good morning, my white angel." Snow, ever alert, would lift his head, his deep brown eyes full of unconditional love. Rosa watched these moments unfold with a heart overflowing with quiet gratitude, silently thankful for the role that horse played in the boy's recovery. Therapy sessions twice a week were no longer a chore, but an adventure. Dr. Beatrice, the physical therapist, quickly realized the immense therapeutic value Snow provided. "I've never seen a bond like this," she remarked during one session, watching Ethan open up in ways he hadn't before. "It's like he hears the words Ethan doesn't say. When I talk about what happened at the cliff," Ethan whispered one afternoon, gently braiding a strand of Snow's mane, "he comes closer like he wants to shield me from remembering." The progress wasn't only emotional, it was physical too, with special adaptive equipment and a lot of encouragement. Ethan was beginning to build upper body strength, becoming more independent in his wheelchair. The Lopez backyard had been redesigned with paved paths, allowing Ethan to roam freely on his own. "Look who's becoming a master at tight turns." Tom beamed as he watched Ethan maneuver confidently, Snow trailing behind at a perfect pace, never too fast, never too slow. Updates on Richard and Vanessa came now and then, distant echoes of a nightmare slowly fading into the past. The legal process moved forward, and Sheriff Brooks assured them justice would be served. But inside the Lopez home, the focus was on the future, not on the pain they'd left behind. "You know what I miss most about Mom?" Ethan asked one afternoon as Rosa gently braided his hair. The way she told stories. Every character had a different voice. His eyes welled with tears, but his smile stayed. "Sometimes I tell stories to Snow, trying to do the voices the way she did." Rosa felt her heart tighten, but kept her hands steady. "Your mom would be so proud of you," she said softly. "You have her gift, the way you see magic in simple things." Ethan's bedroom had become a sanctuary of joyful memories. One entire wall was filled with photos, Snow in the morning light, Ethan grinning during therapy, small milestones captured with love. The photo album he'd received on his first day home was already halfway full, each page telling the story of a new life unfolding. "Look at this one," Mike said during a visit, pointing to a picture where Snow lay on the grass, his head resting gently in Ethan's lap, while the boy read from a storybook. "Looks like a painting, doesn't it? The sunlight, his coat glowing, your calm little smile. It's magic." Nights once haunted by nightmares had taken on a new rhythm. After dinner, Ethan rolled to the window and whispered goodnight to Snow. The horse without fail would take position in view, standing like a white sentinel, guarding the boy's dreams. "The nightmares are happening less," Ethan confided to Dr. Beatrice during a session. "I think it's the dream catcher Aunt Rosa hung, and maybe because I know Snow is always there." Dr. Beatrice smiled as she jotted notes. "And how does that make you feel?" she asked, gently. Ethan thought for a moment, his fingers idly running through Snow's coat, where the horse lay beside him during the session. "I feel safe," he finally said. "Like I have a bigger family now. Uncle Tom, Aunt Rosa, Snow. Even the dream catcher, they're all part of it now." Ethan said, his eyes glowing with a wisdom far beyond his years. "Mom used to say that family is anyone who loves you enough to keep you safe. I think I finally understand what she meant." The courthouse in the small town had never seen a day so weighty with meaning. The long-awaited trial of Richard Hartwell and Vanessa was finally underway, stirring deep emotions in everyone who filled the courtroom. Ethan, dressed in a pale blue suit chosen just for the occasion, clutched Rosa's hand tightly as his wheelchair was rolled into position. Outside, something remarkable was happening. Snow had followed the Lopez family's car all the way, and now stood proudly in front of the courthouse, surrounded by a crowd of admirers. The white horse, now a local legend, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. "He may not be inside with you," Mike whispered to Ethan, "but his spirit's right here." Ethan nodded, fingers gently touching the small horse-shaped pendant around his neck, a gift from Tom to give him courage. Judge Torres, a silver-haired man with kind, clear eyes, observed the boy with particular care. In over 40 years on the bench, he had never presided over a case that moved a community this deeply. When Richard and Vanessa were escorted into the room, a heavy silence settled across the courtroom like a blanket of stone. Ethan, the judge, said gently, "I know this is hard, but can you tell us what happened that morning?" All eyes turned to the small boy in the chair, who inhaled deeply and began to speak. His voice, though soft, rang with clarity and conviction. With stunning composure, he recounted the events of that terrible morning, the promised special outing, the way Snow had behaved strangely the moment his father pushed him toward the edge. Each word, though measured, carried a weight that no one could deny. "And Snow," he added with a small smile. "He never gave up on me. He stayed up there calling out until Uncle Tom realized something was wrong." Silent tears streamed down Rosa's face, while Tom rested a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. Richard, seated in the defendant's chair, couldn't bring himself to look at his son. His hands trembled, and the arrogant posture he once carried was gone. Vanessa sat beside him, sobbing quietly, her expression crumpled with too-late remorse. The prosecution laid out the evidence with surgical precision, charred documents, testimonies from staff security footage showing Richard's vehicle returning alone that morning. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place, revealing a chilling picture of greed and betrayal. A loud neigh pierced the air from outside, causing heads to turn. Even through the thick walls, Snow made his presence known, as if sensing the climax of the moment. Ethan smiled faintly and gripped his pendant tighter. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said firmly, "this is more than a crime against an innocent child. This is a crime against the very idea of humanity. What Richard Hartwell and Vanessa did wasn't just cruel, it was calculated evil carried out against their own son." The court-appointed defense attorney, assigned only after every private firm declined the case, could barely construct a coherent argument. The evidence was overwhelming, and Ethan's calm strength had rendered all justifications hollow. Before announcing the verdict, Judge Torres removed his glasses and addressed the court. "In all my years on this bench," he began, "I've come to understand that justice doesn't always rise from legal codes alone. Sometimes it comes from the heart of a child who, after enduring the unimaginable, still manages to smile with hope. And sometimes it comes from the loyalty of an animal who reminds us what unconditional love truly looks like." As if answering his words, Snow neighed again. This time the sound echoed like a declaration filled with pride and triumph. Ethan's smile widened, knowing his protector was celebrating the coming of justice. Richard Hartwell and Vanessa Alvarez Hartwell. Judge Torres continued, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented and the severity of your crimes, this court delivers its ruling." The room held its breath. The verdict would alter more than just the lives of the guilty. It would define the future of a boy who had survived what no child ever should. When the judge's words finally echoed off the wooden walls, they sounded not just like justice, but like thunder rolling across the sky, cleansing the air and making way for something new. Richard Hartwell and Vanessa Alvarez were sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law. In addition to a lengthy prison term, all their remaining assets were to be transferred into a special trust under Ethan's name, managed by his newly appointed legal guardians, Tom and Rosa Lopez, until he reached adulthood. Beyond punishing the guilty, Judge Torres declared this court holds a responsibility to ensure that Ethan has a future filled with stability, safety, and joy. His kind eyes turned toward the boy, and considering the extraordinary bonds of love and care we've witnessed here today, I also grant the Lopez family full and permanent adoption rights, should that be their desire." Rosa gasped, covering her mouth as joyful tears streamed down her cheeks. Tom gently wrapped Ethan in a protective embrace full of love and pride, while the boy's beaming smile lit up the entire courtroom. Outside, Snow let out a spirited neigh as though he understood the magnitude of the moment. The crowd gathered on the courthouse steps erupted in applause and cheers. Snow rose on his hind legs in a majestic rear, his white coat gleaming against the brilliant blue sky like a living symbol of victory. "Can we go home now?" Ethan asked, his voice sparkling with happiness. "I want to tell Snow everything." But just as they were about to exit, Judge Torres raised his hand with one final pronouncement that surprised everyone. In recognition of the extraordinary role this animal has played, he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, "I hereby designate the horse known as Snow as an official emotional support animal with all rights and privileges that status entails." Mike, seated near the back of the courtroom, couldn't help but exclaim with joy. "That means he can go with you anywhere, Ethan, even to school." Ethan's eyes went wide with delight and disbelief, the news washing over him like a dream come true. As Richard and Vanessa were led away in handcuffs, Ethan glanced at his father one last time and realized something unexpected. He no longer felt afraid. The fear that had once gripped him so tightly had been replaced by a quiet, steady knowing That chapter of his life was closed for good. Rosa was already whispering plans as they made their way down the courthouse steps. "We're going to throw a little celebration back home with chocolate cake, your favorite, and a surprise I've been working on for weeks." Her eyes gleamed with the excitement of a secret well kept. On the way home, Snow trotted beside the Lopez family's car just as he always had, his coat glowing under the soft afternoon sun. People along the sidewalk paused to wave and smile, many already familiar with the sight of the proud white horse escorting his small, beloved charge. When they arrived, Rosa's surprise was finally revealed. A portion of the backyard had been transformed into a small, therapeutic riding paddock, complete with custom ramps and supports, so Ethan could begin a unique form of equine therapy with Snow. "Dr. Beatrice helped me plan every detail." Rosa explained, her voice thick with emotion as she watched Ethan's face light up with wonder. "She said it would be perfect for your healing inside and out." The rest of the afternoon blossomed into a full neighborhood celebration. Families came bearing food and gifts. Children ran through the garden laughing, and Snow grazed nearby, always keeping close to Ethan, occasionally stepping forward for a gentle pat or nuzzle. "You know," Mike said, sitting beside Ethan as they watched the joyful chaos unfold, "some folks say angels walk among us in disguise. I think Snow might be one of them." Ethan smiled, his fingers brushing the small horse pendant around his neck. "It's not a disguise," he replied with that childlike wisdom adults can only hope to understand. "He's just an angel with 4 legs and a big heart." Sheriff Brooks, who had also joined the celebration, stepped forward with a special gift, a custom-made honorary plaque for Snow, officially recognizing the horse's bravery and devotion. "It's the first time we've ever done something like this for an animal," the sheriff said with a grin. "But then again, it's the first time we've met a hero like him." Tom and Rosa stood together, their hands intertwined, watching the scene unfold with hearts full to the brim. Once just the two of them, their family now had grown to 4, with Snow, of course, counted right at the center. And in that moment, as Snow nuzzled Ethan one more time, it was clear to everyone that his mission had never just been about protection. He had helped build a family, one founded not in blood, but in the purest kind of love. "Do you know what I miss most about Mom?" Ethan asked softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon as he sat beside Rosa, watching the amber hues of sunset spill across the backyard. The way she used to say that true love always wins in the end. His voice trembled with nostalgia, his eyes shimmering with both sorrow and gratitude. I think she was right. Don't you? A full year had passed since the trial, and the once quiet Lopez home now hummed with laughter, life, and hope. Spring had blanketed the garden in vibrant color, as if nature itself had joined the celebration of healing that took root there. Ethan, now 7, had blossomed in ways no one could have predicted. His equine therapy sessions with Snow had strengthened not only his body but something far more powerful, his sense of self. His wheelchair, once seen as a limitation, had become part of his daily adventures alongside his loyal companion. "Check this out, Snow," he called out, spinning smoothly through the adapted riding arena in a perfect turn. The white horse followed his every move with loving attentiveness, never taking his intelligent eyes off his young rider. From the porch, Rosa couldn't stop smiling. Pride warmed her chest like sunshine. The transformation of the old Hartwell estate had also become something remarkable. With the funds from Ethan's trust, Tom had turned the property into a therapeutic riding center, where other children with special needs could experience the same healing love Ethan had found with Snow. "Every smile is a victory," Tom remarked to Mike as they watched another session from the fence. Mike, the former climber, now worked part-time at the center, helping to train other horses, though none, he would admit, possessed Snow's quiet magic. Dr. Beatrice had become more than a therapist, she was now family. "Ethan's progress is a case study," she often said. "The power of unconditional love, especially from such an unexpected source as a horse, proves that everyday miracles are very real." Ethan's room, once filled with hopeful dreams, now displayed tangible triumphs. Medals from adaptive riding competitions hung beside photos of him beaming with joy. The Dreamcatcher still hung in the window, though its job had changed. It no longer chased away nightmares, but welcomed peaceful dreams. "Mom would be so proud," Ethan whispered one afternoon as Rosa braided his hair. "She always told me I was stronger than I knew. I think Snow helped me find that strength." News about Richard and Vanessa rarely made it to the Lopez house anymore, and when it did, it was met with calm. Ethan had learned that forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was releasing the weight of pain to make room for something better. Snow, now officially recognized as Ethan's emotional support animal, was part of his daily life. At school, the horse waited patiently in the designated outdoor area, quickly becoming the most beloved figure on campus. His presence transformed even ordinary school days into something quietly magical. "You know what I love most about our story?" Ethan asked one warm afternoon during a picnic in the garden. "It proves that family doesn't have to be about blood to be real." His eyes swept across the faces surrounding him, the people he loved and Snow, who gently took a carrot from his hand with careful precision. Sheriff Brooks, who stopped by regularly, often grew emotional watching Ethan's growth. "Sometimes justice moves in mysterious ways," he once said. "Who would have thought a horse would teach us so much about love and loyalty?" The community had embraced the Lopez family in extraordinary ways. The riding center had become a gathering place, a haven where stories of resilience unfolded daily. Snow, of course, was the star, instilling confidence in each new child who arrived with fear in their eyes but hope in their hearts. On a particularly special morning in Willow Creek, Ethan was getting ready for his very first formal para-equestrian showcase. Dressed in a crisp white riding outfit that matched Snow's coat, he looked like the embodiment of grace and courage. Nervous Rosa asked, as she adjusted the pink ribbon in his hair, the same color Mom used to choose. Ethan touched the horse pendant around his neck, now joined by a tiny medallion of the Virgin Mary. "Not really," he said simply. "Snow's with me, and when we're together, there's nothing we can't do." As if he understood, Snow stepped forward and gently touched his muzzle to Ethan's shoulder. Tom, watching from a few feet away, blinked back tears. "Your mom was right," he whispered. "True love always finds a way. And sometimes it comes with 4 legs and a heart bigger than the sky." The morning sun bathed the arena in golden light as Ethan and Snow took their places. In the stands, familiar faces watched with shining eyes, witnessing not just a performance, but a living testament to love that had turned tragedy into triumph, sorrow into strength, and an ordinary horse into a guardian angel. "Let's go, my white angel," Ethan whispered to Snow, his smile glowing like the stars his mother had loved so dearly. "We've got more stories to write together." Hey friends, before we wrap up this video, I just want to take a moment to share my thoughts on this story, and I hope you'll share yours too in the comments below. Now, just to be clear, this story isn't based on real events. It's fictional, a work of creative storytelling. But even though it's not true, it hits on some very real emotions and important lessons. At its heart, this is a story about pain, survival, and ultimately hope. It's about a child who was betrayed in the worst way imaginable, yet found strength in unexpected places, in the kindness of strangers, in the loyalty of a horse, and in the healing power of love. Ethan's journey reminds us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people and animals who choose to stand by us when things fall apart. And Snow, he's more than just a horse. He represents loyalty, instinct, and that silent, unshakable kind of love we all hope to experience at least once in our lives. The story also shines a light on tough topics: child abuse, greed, neglect, but it never loses its sense of humanity. That's what makes it so powerful. Even in the darkest moments, there's light. There's resilience. There's justice. So I want to hear from you. What part of Ethan's story touched you the most? What lessons did you take away from it? Do you believe animals like Snow really know when something's wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every one of them. And if this story moved you even a little, consider sharing it. Let's keep these conversations about empathy, healing, and hope going.